Well, we've almost flipped the calendar over to the month of August, and as we do that, we're watching plenty of storms roll through the Corn Belt, more heat in the South as well. Got a lot to take a look at and talk about here this week. Joining us now for a look at our weather forecast, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. And Eric, good to catch up with you again here this week. And man, oh man, I know from a market perspective on Friday, markets just collapsed on the latest forecast model runs. And we kind of saw some of that start to shape up over this past weekend and into early part of the week with showers and storms in parts of the Corn Belt and some of that heat building in the South. So start with the rain first. What does this pattern kind of look like here this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's pouring the rain outside my house right now, and I live in Champaign County, which is in eastern Illinois. It's a top 5 producing corn and soybean county in the country, and that's just been it. We watched storms this weekend come out of the parts of the northern plains, filling in some holes, not all, but some holes in parts of the Dakotas, spread through parts of central Iowa, spread into Illinois this morning. And this is just the beginning. We are expecting more storms in the Ohio River Valley, which is one of our drier spots of the Corn Belt, and on repeat throughout much of this week. So a pretty stormy week setting up for us. And where all that heat's kind of curling around us, a big dome of high pressure and high heat over parts of Kansas. We might hit 105 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit in central Kansas. That's before the heat index. So I'm talking very, very hot conditions. But running the edge is going to be the storms. And that's what we watched evolve all last week. Most models were like, oh, dry, dry, dry. And then we meteorologists were very skeptical of that, given the abundance of moisture, given the Bermuda high pumping the moisture in. And models kind of conformed to what our thoughts were, which was for ridge riding storms. Now, there's a risk with this. Like this morning when these storms came through, we saw winds about 50 miles an hour. I don't think there was any damage. I don't have any limbs down in the yard that I have to go clean up after we're done. But with some of the storms we're going to watch, they're going to be linear in nature, which means the risk of straight line wind damage is there. And the Storm Prediction Center is keeping an eye on that. So that's the story for this week in the central ag belt. Heat is going to be anchored in Kansas and the surrounding states. So part of Nebraska, Colorado, down into Oklahoma, Texas, parts of Missouri are going to get hot. Parts of southwestern Iowa are going to get hot. But all along the edge, it's going to storm quite a bit. And that's going to be that's the end of July, getting into August, right? So we think about the crops that need this rain. This is about as perfectly timed as you could get. And honestly, even though I'm telling you how hot it's going to get in the central plains this week, this is the first real heat that's lasted more than 2 to 3 days in the central United States, going all the way back to the end of June. So yeah, that's our setup.
Well, and I think too, some of these storms are going to do their part to maybe hold some of that heat as far south as possible. It feels like here with this pattern. Am I saying that right, kind of, Eric?
Yeah, it's just more about when you get the atmosphere to pop with the moisture and make storms, you get cloud cover, it suppresses the heat, and where you don't, and it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter as the sun just beats down. So there's this sharp dividing line. It kind of follows, parts of the Missouri River as it kind of curls out of Missouri in toward, parts of Nebraska and South Dakota. That if you stay to the south and west of that, you're trapped in the heat. If you get to the north and east of it, then you're going to see storm activity. So it's kind of interesting. I think that river might serve as an interesting boundary overall on where the moisture is going to be and where it's not.
Okay, so watching storms, watching heat. I know we've had these Canadian wildfires. That's been something we've been keeping an eye on. What are some other things surrounding that or other weather features you're keeping an eye on here this week in the U.S.?
Yeah, so a lot of smoke in the upper atmosphere for the last about 10 days, primarily due to some huge wildfires, both in the western United States, which has had some enormous fires. In fact, the U.S. has already burned about 4 million acres. A year ago, we were only at 1 million, so it's important to see those differences. But we're right about 500,000 over the 10-year average. So we couldn't look at this year and say, oh, it's just been record-setting when you just compared to last year, quite a bit more. But Canada has been the wild card. So for the last almost month, we've seen huge fires in British Columbia, northern Alberta, parts of Saskatchewan. But last week, a big storm system hit that area and dumped up to 3 inches of rain in spots, naturally putting those fires out. There's only a few fires that remain today, so that's good to see that. But we'll be dealing with the smoke from those fires throughout the week in the upper atmosphere. You'll see quite a bit of haze, brilliantly red sunsets if you get to see a sunset unless you're under some of the bigger storms in the Midwest. But I think that's really telling us to where this pattern's been and where it's going to go, Jesse. I think we're going to take heat back to the west and leave it there, which unfortunately means the western wildfire risk, the high evaporation rates, the risk of just a very hot and dry summer continuing for the west is going to be the case.
I just thought about this as well. The tropics. What's going
Mhm.
on in the Atlantic? We saw things, perk up real fast with Hurricane Beryl, and then it seems like it's got quiet again. So what's going on there?
It does, and that's typical of July. I mean, really, we think of August as the start of the more busy part of the hurricane season. So honestly, we've got another 90 days of this hurricane season ahead of us, and the Bermuda High is in place and it's strong. I mean, that's where the moisture from these storms outside is coming from. And the Bermuda High later on this week, probably on Wednesday, is going to spin up a tropical low pressure center somewhere around the Lesser Antilles. So this is kind of like Antigua and Barbuda. What we don't know is if those storms are going to go toward Cuba and get into the Gulf of Mexico, or if they're going to stay, which I think they're more likely going to do, over the Bahamas and then possibly develop into a tropical system along the southeast coast. Now, this morning on Monday, the model guidance would tell me to tell you that these storms will likely, even if they do develop into a tropical system, maybe spread some rain in the southeast, but not hit the southeast as an organized, big hurricane. But there's always a but to this, right? The ocean temperatures right now are warm enough to support a tropical system that could evolve well past Cat 4 into Cat 5. So in other words, the ocean is primed. It's a wind shear question. It's a question about where a front might be to push the system out and the strength of the Bermuda High. Plus, remember, on the northern side of the storm system, it's still chewing on some dust from the Sahara. So as it develops midweek this week, it's not going to be an issue, I think, for the Mississippi Valley. That'll be later. We'll get storms to come up the Mississippi Valley, I think, later on in this hurricane season. But this will be one that the Southeast should keep a close eye on.
All right. Well, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, as we're getting ready to flip this calendar into August, I know a lot of times, a lot of folks, when they're watching the markets, things like that, they really key in on the 6 to 10 day forecasts, during the summer. What are you seeing with, some of the 6 to 10, 8 to 14 day forecasts as you look a little farther out into August? What's some of the setup and the features you're going to be keeping an eye on, Eric?
Well, that time period, that week 2 forecast has been too aggressive on bringing in and leaving heat in places it's not been. I'm talking about the Great Lakes specifically. Very limited around those states. And so, I'm talking, that includes Ohio to Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota. That when I say Great Lakes, I'm talking about those states. So that means that if every time the model's been forecasting for heat to get into that area and stay and it's failed, why isn't persistence going to be my best guidance going forward? So if I see heat getting into the area, I'm going to question it in a big way. I think we are set up because of the ocean temperature patterns, the attempt at getting La Nina trying to go in the Pacific. I think as we go into the month of August, we're going to see more episodes of heat in the West with limited intrusions of heat in the central US. But it's August. There will be a scare that'll pop up in the markets some point where we're like, oh no, it's going to get hot and dry and the beans are going to have some issue. And that'll happen at some point. I don't know when, but it happens every August. And but I would just question any sort of a longer term forecast for heat in the central US. For 2 weeks, I thought we could get it to happen. Then about Thursday last week, I'm like, nope, this thing is just going to collapse and keep collapsing and sending heat west and keeping the Bermuda High pumping in the moisture, cooler air anchored somewhere between the Great Lakes and the Hudson Bay. And that seems to be the pattern we're in love with this summer across the midsection of the country. So unfortunately, in fact, I got to go talk to a group of Brazilians here in a little bit. They're going to ask me, why has the market not recovered this summer? I'm going to tell them it's been US weather with that pattern keeping the extremities away from the Corn Belt. And we've lost a lot of position in the markets, I think, because of weather. It's other things too, and you know that, of course, but weather didn't help. Weather did not spark a good summer rally this year, and the storms outside of my house right now are good evidence of that.
Yeah, and we saw some of that rally get taken away last week. And your point there, your conversation with folks from South America, we're going to talk more about that next week. But with that, we'll let you go. Find more at agweather.com, ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Have a great week, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jesse.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.